Hey, Jody here. Thanks for watching another video from weldingtipsandtricks.com. I've got a lot to cover today, so we're going to get right into it. 1F, 2F, 3F, and 4F T-joint, all using the same exact technique. This is part 1, and part 2 I'll also stack a bunch of beads using a slightly different technique, and then we'll do a cut and etch and check and make sure we penetrated everything. Let's do it. This is the technique, and basically it just traces the leading edge of the puddle. Flat, horizontal, vertical uphill, and overhead. Same technique. Just traces that teardrop shape in the front of the puddle. First up is flat. 1F flat T-joint. The F stands for fillet weld. So for the flat, the 1F, and the horizontal 2F, I'm going to be using a slight pull angle, a drag angle. And just from that, I know that I'm going to get some comments saying that I should have been pushing it, but I'm going to keep everything the same here. I'm going to use the factory recommended settings on this ESAB Rebel 205. This is the one that does TIG, AC, DC, as well as MIG and stick and flux core. And I'm going to use factory recommended settings for 1/4 inch thick steel, except that I dropped the wire feed speed by about 10%. Recommended also is 35% on the inductance. I'm going to get into that, probably doing some messing around with that later on, changing that. I already have done a little bit of changing it, running some tests at 100% inductance on some thin stuff uphill. But for right now, 20 volts, 333 inches a minute, 35% inductance. And I'm going to be using this technique, which is going to keep my arc toward the leading edge of the puddle. So I'll be watching that tip of that wire and try to make those little V's, try to keep that up in the front of the puddle so I can punch it down into the root of the joint. Again, I'll do the cut and etch in a part 2 video here to see how we did on that. With all short circuit MIG welding, it's important to watch your stick out, and that's the distance from the contact tip to the arc basically. And I'm trying to keep that less than 1/2 inch, 3/8 probably even better. So take a look at your nozzle and contact setup and make sure your contact tip isn't recessed way back up in there. This is about flush. Flush works. I would kind of prefer it to be protruding just a little bit, because on a fillet weld like this, you can only get in there so close because of the nozzle. Alright, 2F horizontal. It's almost the same as 1F. It's just a little bit different. It's really no more difficult. But same exact technique. I'm going to be tracing the front leading edge of that puddle. Get that arc punched down in there to get penetration. Same thing, a little bit of a drag angle. I've done lots of videos, push versus pull, and there are definitely differences, but you can penetrate using either one with short circuit MIG. Pulling seems to penetrate a little deeper. When you get into spray transfer, that's when I would say push as a rule. You can also pull when you have to, even using spray. But again, I'm using the little series of V's sort of, tracing the front edge of that puddle, trying to stay up in the front, trying to hold a short stick out. And I got to mention that this is probably not the best technique for looks. I have found that it doesn't look quite as good as like doing a series of cursive E's or something like that. But whenever I've done cut and etch tests, this technique has always been very consistent, getting penetration into the root. Now I'm sputtering here like crazy, and I discovered the reason is I did not get a good ground. I forgot to attach the ground to a good spot. So basically I'm grounded here on this little tree, and I'm grounded through a rusty plate, and it's transferring through the table up through a vise, and that was sputtering like crazy toward the end because of the ground. So a ground is super important with MIG welding. That wire is coming out whether you got a ground or not. For overhead, a lot of people think you need to turn the machine down so that the bead won't sag, and I have found that I run it pretty much the same as I do flat or horizontal. What is really important though is gun angle, so if I do use a little bit of a drag angle, I'm not going to use much angle at all. In fact, after the fact here, I noticed that I was doing a little slight drag to start with, but then kind of transitioned into a little bit of a push, and I didn't even realize it. But you know what? Dead nuts straight in 90 degrees is something really good to shoot for. You don't want to get carried away with too much push. You don't want to do too much pull. So shoot for 90 degrees, you'll be good to go. Once again, the technique is the same. Just tracing the front edge of the puddle. And once again, trying to keep my stick out as short as possible without bumping my nozzle all over the place. I think the short stick out probably helps more than anything, as well as the good hot settings for overhead. So let's do that. Couldn't hardly capture a good you know, line of sight here with the camera, but so this is sort of a trailing shot here. But you can sort of see that I'm using that same technique, and I'm trying to keep a really short stick out. As I mentioned before, on a part 2 of this thing, I will also stack at least two more beads on each one of these, probably a lot more than that actually, and then we'll do a cut and etch, and then we'll check the root penetration as well as in between layer penetration on that video. Now for the vertical uphill, I am turning this thing down, and basically I'm just using the next metal setting down from the chart that's on the inside of the machine, and I'm dropping the wire feed speed by about 10%. And once again, I'm sounding like a broken record, I know, but keeping a short stick out, super important on being able to punch that arc and that wire down into the root. Now, I ran into that grounding issue on an earlier joint on the horizontal, so I've got that bare copper strand of wire in addition to the clamp clamped directly to the piece here. So I should be getting a good ground from start to finish here. I'm sweeping that arc right up into the root of the joint. It kind of looks like a V, especially on the vertical uphill here. But again, I'm just a series of upside down V's. And once again, this is probably not the best way to make the best looking weld uphill or any of the others, but it works as far as getting penetration. Just a good go-to technique if you're in doubt, if you don't have time to practice and perfect techniques to make everything look great. It's just a good go-to technique to make a good sound weld, and that's what's most important. Hey, just got some new TIG gloves in, added them to the store. Black ones, just like the other ones except black, so they don't show so much dirt. Nice and soft, no seam on the palm where sometimes it pops open and you get a hot spot there. You can check them out at weldmonger.com. That's my store. That's how I support these videos. See you next time.